Hey, how's it going, lads? What's up? And welcome back to another reaction video. Today we're going to be having a look at Gigabeef's video called This Is How We Fix Tarkov. Also, quickly before we get into it, lads, if you're wondering why the camera is black and white today, it's because my face decided to be an asshole and break out and it's all red and shit. So to make me feel a little less conscious, I have put my camera on black and white so I don't have to look at it and you don't have to look at it. So let's get into it. Let's have a look at what Gigabeef has to say. All right. Let's have a look.
Today, we will be outlining a system that I believe would resolve many of Tarkov's current problems, most specifically regarding find and raid and the current state of PvP, which is an extremely hot topic. After extensive thought and community dialogue, I ultimately believe that BSG needs to delete find and raid from the flea market. Let me show you why. It would be an understatement to say that Tarkov has some problems right now, and this wipe has been one of the most scuffed for technical issues such as audio, networking, and cheaters, which has been done to absolute death over the last few months. But it has also sparked discussion more generally about the game's structure, why PvP feels unprofitable and unrewarding most of the time, and how the incentives in Tarkov drive players to leave raids early, leading to less action, increasingly boring raids, and players dropping out once the early wipe frenzy is over. In order to solve these problems, we need to go right back to the start to understand what the issues were in the past, how they were solved then, for better or worse, and how we can improve on these systems knowing what we know now without reintroducing any of the previous problems back into the game in the process. I promise that we'll get into my actual suggestions because this section does take a bit of time, but
you know what's funny? Like, we've had this conversation about like remove the flea market, keep the flea market. The one thing that like I haven't found myself thinking about is like removing found and raid, and I think the reason why I haven't given any thought to it is just because I don't think it's ever going to change. I think in that removing it could definitely open the game up to, you know, more profitable gear selling after you kill somebody, maybe a bit easier money making. It would let us kind of trade with other players more easily and more freely, which I get. And I guess I just haven't given it much thought because it's just one of those things where like, well, we're stuck with it now. Better get used to it. Maybe keep like found and raid for like quest items, but then maybe for everything else, like you can sell on the fleet, like maybe not. I don't know.
please bear with me because it's super important that we take a step back and look over the whole history to come to sensible conclusions about the way forward. If you really want to just hear the conclusions, I'll timestamp it for later on, but I seriously think that the context is important as to why I have come to the answer provided in this video. So in original Tarkov with the flea market, but before any restrictions were added, there were three main problems to solve: hatchlings, buying through quests, and trader flipping. Before find and raid was introduced, hatchlings, i.e. players running with just a melee weapon, or hatchet, which is where the name comes from, could run to loot locations and grab GPUs, LEDX, and other expensive items risk-free into their secure container to sell on the flea even if they died, making easy, no-risk money. At one point the game was absolutely plagued with them, as it was often the best risk-reward strategy for making rubles, because there's no risk other than your time. Some other systems, like having to heal from 0 at Therapist and Tagged and Cursed, where undergeared players get pinpointed by Scavs, were tried, but none of these totally fixed the issue. At the same time, many quests were entirely pointless because quest items that weren't special items like Bronze Pocket Watch could simply be bought from the flea and handed in. Really not ideal. We also had trader flipping. High rep.
I will say though, it was kind of fun back in the day to get onto a quest where something just had to be handed over and then you go to the flea and you buy it and you hand it in and you could just like chain a ton of quests together doing that. Like that was fun, but like I obviously completely understand why that system is totally flawed. But now, because we're so like, you know, seasoned in the game that like from day one of the wipe, we're collecting items we need for those quests anyway. So by the time they come around, you just hand them in anyway. It's just a different way of doing it, I guess. It's a system now that rewards like your knowledge and playtime rather than a system of where wiki, item, flea market, buy, quest done, you know?
Players would monetize their trader level through purchasing items from tiers 2, 3, and 4 and putting them straight back onto the flea market for lower level players to buy at an inflated markup. Although these items were often quite
There is a simple fix for that. You just can't flea market stuff you buy from the trader, though. I'm sure he's going to mention it, but
expensive because any items were available for resale on the flea. Once you reached the level requirement to access the flea market, you could basically buy anything you wanted so long as you had the funds. This ended the early game in a matter of weeks because everything was available all of the time. The big plus side to these old days of Tarkov though was that because you could sell items from your secure container on the flea market even if you died, finding a LEDX wasn't a raid ender and you could still go about your business knowing that you had pocket pocketed some guaranteed profit either way. Also, PvP was much more rewarding because anything that you looted from your kills was fair game. Ammo, gear, helmets, grenades, you name it, all could be put up onto the flea. So in patch 12.6, in comes the Find in Raid feature to solve the first 3 issues: hatchlings, buying or dying through quest progression, and trader resales. Naked players running to loot locations now could no longer die after collecting their items if they wanted to sell them on the flea, and while they could offload them to traders instead or use them in the hideout, the value here was often so much lower and the ability to make free money was significantly reduced. Quest items could now no longer be bought on the flea market for handing in to traders, as they also had to be extracted successfully given the Find in Raid tag would be removed on death or from a run through. As items purchased from traders would not come with a Find in Raid tag either, these could not be resold on the flea market, preventing players from flipping trader items for massive profit every reset. However, endgame gear was still available on the flea super early on, as experienced players could, for example, get class 5 armors and high-end ammo from raiders on labs even in the first few days, which were eligible to be sold on the flea market as they came from AI with the Find in Raid tag. Also, good ammunition that was crafted in the hideout was still sellable to other players too, which led to the early wipe ending extremely quickly. One problem with the introduction of Find in Raid that would only become apparent later was that players valued their life much more when finding high value items. I hear you say, well, surely this is a good thing, and it is generally, but one big downside is that players would now extract as soon as one of these items was secured. Raids would then empty out much more quickly.
Man, I've talked about this so much. Man, this has been like a topic of conversation for literal years now. And it's just, again, one of those things where like, it happens now all the time. It's why your raids tend to feel quieter, because if somebody finds something they need, they immediately leave. And it just leads to like quieter raids, more people playing very, very passively, people camping. I understand why it's there in the first place, but it's like, are the consequences that we have now better than the consequences of what it was like before? You know what I mean? I don't even know if there's a way to like balance the game around that to where it's like a perfect system. I feel like there's always going to be issues like this, no matter what kind of system they put in place.
Playstyle as they move to the exits. This is exactly the situation that we have right now. Combined with the fact that selling PMC loot on the fleet was now impossible because it had no Find in Raid tag anymore, this forced players to either use the gear from downed players or sell it to the traders for a fraction of its real value. This has led to the situation today. Good attachments get stripped, but whole guns and many pieces of armor are simply left in Raid in favor of 10k per slot Find in Raid items that make more money overall. One question is, were casuals better off? Well, a little bit, but not really. High levels were not flipping ammo anymore, but you could still get Altins on the flea market and run meta weapons and gear if you had enough cash, because they spawn on AI, so they're readily available on the market. To combat the continuing availability of meta gear, next came the introduction of the flea market restrictions. After a few iterations tightening the belt on this system, we have no class 5 or 6 armors on the flea, and even some class 4s, no top-end weapons, no high-level ammo, and various high-end helmets and other equipment has also been banned. This removed the ability for max-level players to buy meta kits every raid. It also stretched out the early wipe by a considerable margin. You could still get high-level armor from boss-grade AI or a lucky stash find for yourself, but as it wasn't sellable anymore, these were for personal consumption only.
I think this is probably my biggest gripe with EFT. The most consistent and honestly best way of like making money in this game and acquiring high-level armor in this game is through stash running. It's easily the most consistent because not every raid you're going to get raiders, and then not every raid you're going to get raiders that actually have high tier gear on them, such as armor, helmets, you know, even the rogues. In my opinion, like, rogues are some of the hardest, most imbalanced AI in the game, yet they reward damn near nothing for killing them other than XP. These days, before, rogues used to actually have pretty decent gear and decent ammo, so it was worth killing them and worth running out in the open in dangerous places on Lighthouse to actually go and loot them. But now, most of the time when I kill a rogue, I just leave it there because it's not worth the risk to reward ratio. And another thing that I just don't understand is, like, why isn't, like, high tier ammo more available in high tier, like, PvP zones on maps? Why isn't high tier ammo or armor more available in Kiba? Why isn't high tier armor more available on labs? There are no armor pickups on labs. There should be rooms in the game that reward like high tier armor, but it should be like a risk to go there, such as Kiba. Even if marked rooms spawned high tier armor, it would make those rooms way more valuable because, in my opinion, marked room is almost pointless now. What are you going to get? Some bare guns that aren't, like, most of the time aren't worth shit anyway. Unless it's a gunsmith gun, it's not really worth anything. It's the attachments that make guns, like, actually worth it.
Looking at the flea restrictions themselves, without the find and raid system, it doesn't actually modify anything around hatchlings, quest items, or trader flips, but also doesn't introduce any extra mechanics to force players to leave a raid early. It does disincentivize PvP a little bit, especially at the top level, as flea banned items clearly can't be sold to other players, but some class 4s, low and mid-grade weapons, all attachments, and most other gear such as headsets, unarmored rigs, and bags could also be put on the flea, at least in theory. Putting find and raid and the flea bans together gets to where we are now. BSG solved the main issues of hatchlings, quests, trader flips, early game longevity, and constant metakit usage for high-level players. But we also scupper part of what made PvP in Tarkov compelling, due to players wanting to extract fast after finding good loot items and the inability to sell other players' gear off at a fair price when you do win a fight. So, onto the proposals, the first being the removal of find and raid in its current form as it relates to the flea market, but keeping the flea market bans. This retains the early wipe longevity, as top tier items are still inaccessible on the flea, but allows for player gear to be sold there, so long as it's not a banned item. Alongside this, increase the trader repurchase value for the banned items to some sensible amount, let's say 80 to 90% of the item's original price, which sounds fairly reasonable to me. This allows you to make decent money from the high tier equipment, but doesn't break the game's progression by selling it to other players. One optional piece would be to increase the value of dog tags that come from PMCs outside of your party group.
Dude, it's funny, man. Like, I've said this before too. It's like killing a PMC these days, like, yeah, you get their gear. Most of the time when you kill somebody, like, they're not running great gear. A lot of people are very much choosing to use, like, very run-of-the-mill gear with, like, class 3, class 4 armor. Like, class 4 armor these days is useless. Class 4 armor is really only good for, like, the first couple of weeks of a wipe. The only other reason you'd use it is to maybe defend yourself against scavs. But, like, running into players past even a couple of weeks into the wipe, like, class 4 armor isn't going to do anything for you. Class 5 at the moment is bare minimum for staying alive. Class 6 then is just a bonus on top of it. But, like, class 5 is definitely the most commonly run, like, high-level armor. That being said, like, most of the time when I kill a PMC, the ammo that I'm shooting is worth more than what they have on them. And then, oh, I'm going to get a dog tag and it's only going to be worth 20k. And then maybe a suppressor off their gun if I'm lucky, or a gun that vendors for 30, 40k if I'm lucky. You also have the problem of, like, lower level players to where they can't pick up multiple sets of, like, even TV10 rigs. Because if you pick up one on top of your current armor and don't choose to ditch your own gear, you're already, like, instantly overweight. So there's so many systems in the game right now that are just completely against you PvPing and taking loot off other players because you're being punished for looting gear off other players for the most part.
Already exists for quests like Shooterborn in Heaven, and cheesing this is so much harder now that we have aggregated regional servers, decreasing the likelihood of getting into each other's games without being in a party. Now, one radical outcome of this system is that it fixes the issue of players leaving the raid just for high value items that they find, because items stowed away in the secure container could now be sold on the flea market on death. But before you begin to bristle, I'll explain how this is fine with the next proposal, dealing with hatchlings. As we've now removed find and raid in its existing form, we have to once again deter naked players from running into high loot hotspots and hoovering up the best items. To do this, we need proposal 2, to have scavs in those locations at or very close to the start of the raid, i.e. before players can get them.
Dude, god damn, this is literally something we've been talking about for like 6 years. This is like the biggest thing we've talked about. Like, when you go to Shoreline, because I remember, like, hatchlings used to be everywhere on Shoreline. You'd go there and all the rooms would be looted, and then there'd be a guy dead in a room. And, like, look, I know people are gonna reference the meme video I made, how streamers really make money. And look, I know I was a contributing factor to that whole thing. I'm aware some people took that as a guide when it was actually supposed to be like a parody video making fun of people who do that. But look, I'll take responsibility. I know a lot more hatchlings were doing that shit because of my video, so sorry about that. But all those years ago, we were talking about this. Why are scavs in certain just silly places on Shoreline when the majority of them should be, like, in the resort? Like, if you just had a couple of scavs, maybe even, like, slightly more higher geared scavs, like outside high tier loot rooms, like, that would have solved a massive amount of the hatchling problems. In dorms, you'd put a couple of scavs outside marked room. And that's it. Like, that's all that had to be done. Like, it could have been fixed, but I guess there was engine limitations at the time to where scavs couldn't be put in these certain locations for some reason or another. But I feel like these days we could easily do it. And it's still something that should be in the game. Like there should be scavs by these high tier loot rooms or bosses or something. I don't know.
This means that as a PMC, you'll need the ability to kill 1 or 2 scavs to access those places, which requires at least the bare minimum of gearing up. Onto this, I would also introduce a delay when placing items into the secure container, along the lines of the CMS or the Serve12 animation. This would require a player to be stationary and risk being heard while this plays, which is only fair for protecting a high value item and allowing it to be resold. If a player can get in, kill the scavs, wait for the secure container timer, or alternatively run with the item and risk dying with it on their body before they place it in later once they reach a safe area to do so, then they probably deserve the loot.
That's an interesting idea.
Quests. Proposal 3 is fairly simple. Although we have removed Find in Raid for the flea market, we will actually keep the system and rename it to Quest Eligible. The exact same mechanics can stay for this flag as the existing Find in Raid system, except it only applies to quest hand-ins with the traders.
Yeah.
Although the Find in Raid flowchart is a bit torturous, credit to Veritas for showing just how ridiculous it can be at times with this lovely graphic, it does make a lot more sense for quest items because now it's not having to apply to literally every item in the game. We've also tested this system quite a lot at this point, and in short, you either have to extract with the item, get it from a quest reward, or craft it in the hideout. Nothing else counts for quest hand-ins. Yes, of course, this means that players who are questing will still want to leave the raid as soon as possible once they find their item, but now this system only applies to quests, not to general looting and to other high value items, which I think is the best compromise. The one piece that we still haven't dealt with here is the ability to flip trader items on the flea market. Proposal 4 is to create a new flag called Not For Resale, which is applied to items purchased on the traders themselves. For yourself or any members of your party group, this flag is never removed. This ensures that on survived raids, getting items back in insurance or handing them to teammates, that nobody has the ability to cheese the flag away, which would allow the items to go back onto the flea. The Not For Resale flag should only be removed if a non-partied player removes the item in question from a raid back to their own stash. For those players, they would never even see the tag in the first place, and once safely in their hideout, could be freely resold on the flea market by them. Of course, so long as if the item isn't banned in the first place.
I think that if the item is bought by a player, oh geez, that is so tricky, because that will definitely lead to discords of people that are sniping each other with backpacks filled with loot and then swapping backpacks and extracting with it. That is the only issue that I think I've seen with this video so far, but I love the rest of the suggestions, but that would be something you'd have to be careful with.
These 4 proposals combined, we've covered off all of the issues that Find in Raid was meant to fix, but adjusted it such that the collateral damage that it has caused to PvP is minimized. Let's summarize the combination of the proposals. Firstly, keep the flea market restrictions as they are right now, but remove Find in Raid for the flea entirely. Adjust trader repurchase values for flea restricted gear to 80 to 90% of its initial price, and boost the value of non-teammate dog tags. Add scavs around high value loot locations, and add a delay to items entering the secure container with an identifiable sound cue. Rename Find in Raid to Quest Eligible instead, which only dictates which items can be handed into the traders to complete quests. Finally, add a new item flag Not For Resale, which prevents trader-sourced items from being sold on the flea market until extracted successfully by a non-party member PMC or scav when the flag clears. As I said before, being able to sell secure container items on the flea after death is probably the most radical outcome of this system, but given we've dealt with hatchlings and quests in Proposal 2, this would actually help casual players to retain a bit of extra money after failed raids. It feels intuitively wrong because we're so used to how it works right now, but we shouldn't be allergic to players, and especially new players, making a little bit of extra cash.
Yeah, I really changed my stance on this over the years. I used to be super anti new player. Not that I didn't want new players to play the game, but my attitude towards it was, this is how the game works. It's not an easy game. It's supposed to be hard, get fucked if you die with an item up your ass and it's useless to you now. Recently, I don't know why, but in the last year or so, I'm like, man, I really feel like they should make this game a little bit more accessible to newer players and casual players. I'm not even sure why my stance has changed on it. Maybe it's because I'm somewhat becoming more of a casual player myself. And I think that whole elitism thing that we had to do with Tarkov, and that it's this really hardcore, inaccessible game for most people, is just, I don't know, I just don't think it's a healthy thing anymore. I used to feel that way, but not really so much anymore. So I wouldn't mind seeing things change to make it a little bit more accessible and easier for casual players to play.
So long as we tackle the core issues, which I believe this does. One valid concern is around the increase in scavs on the map as deterrents. First off, regarding scav killing quests, the number required could simply be increased if players are progressing too quickly. But on the other hand, they would only be around hotspots anyway, which are typically dangerous places to be. I think that most players would rather have more scavs to kill and a higher number to achieve, rather than simply being unable to find them at all, so overall it's probably a net positive. From a technological standpoint, with the improvements to the game's performance that we're supposed to be getting relatively soon, such as Nikita's quoted 60 player entities on the map at any one time, adding a few more scavs into these areas shouldn't be a problem, assuming that it all goes to plan. I know that some of you are skeptical, but we have to work with what we've been told.
First one. Increasing the number of players in a raid to 60. This will happen gradually and not on every location.
One final point that I want to address before we finish up is around whether these changes are better or worse for the casual player than in the pre-find and raid era. Under the freestyle flea market that we had before, meta equipment was available 24/7 and allowed max trader type players to run it non-stop. While casual players technically had the ability to buy ammunition and items to deal with geared players, the vast majority simply didn't because it was generally expensive and you made a ton more money for your budget kits by selling high-end items to said max trader players instead via the flea. Those of us that played back then will remember practically every highish level player running a slick and a meta weapon in pretty much every raid if they wanted to. From an experienced player's perspective, it seemed easy enough for the casuals to buy a Vepr Hunter and load it with M61 to ignore any armor, and sure, some people did do this kind of thing, but in the casual player's shoes, these players often just died anyway, except this time losing more expensive ammunition. This is due to having a subpar weapon, along with less experience of the game mechanics, map knowledge, aim. These are the many disadvantages that a new or casual
Is he getting his dad to play? That's amazing.
player tends to have, which prevents them from actually doing the things that seem obvious from an experienced player's point of view. I personally believe that the restricted era of Tarkov is still better overall for casuals, mainly because of the scarcity of top tier ammo, and that's in spite of harsher trader gating for low level players who are unable to access both top bullets and top armor even if they wanted to. David and Goliath moments in Tarkov are still certainly possible, and perhaps even better now than during certain patches, as very few players wear face shields and the Altin is borderline impossible to get hold of. Leg meta is as strong as it ever has been, with shotguns and SMGs since the black limb changes a while back, and because of ballistic mechanics such as fragmentation and limb penetration, good armor is arguably the least useful it's been in a long time. However, that one's for another video. The balancing is certainly not perfect, and there are still some other things that we could do to help with this, but we're not going to solve all of Tarkov's problems in one video. So if you like these proposals, please go and share them around to others and let me know what you think. I want to know of any glaring flaws, anything that doesn't work about this or would break the game further. I strongly believe that we have an unprecedented opportunity right now to improve Tarkov for the future, and I want it to be done properly. The right solution is more important than me being right.
He pretty much hit the nail on the head. I can't say I disagree with really anything he said there. The only thing that would worry me about that one system he spoke about was Q sniping each other with bags full of gear. That's probably the only thing. Shoutouts to Gigabeef. That was a great video. It's funny, no matter how many of these videos we watch, there's always one like recurring theme, and it's that like for the most part, like we always agree with each other, like everybody within the community kind of, you know, well, look, I shouldn't say everybody because there are going to be some people that are going to disagree with him, but there is a lot of people that agree that moving Tarkov in that direction and changing some of the stuff to do with the flea market and the found and raid mechanics and stuff would end up being a net healthy thing for the game rather than a net negative. So with all that being said, guys, please make sure you go check out Gigabeef's channel. His channel will be linked down below. Go give him a sub, give him a like, check out his videos. And of course, like, comment, subscribe if you like seeing this kind of content over here. And lads, hopefully you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.